Confucius, or the Master as he is sometimes known, lived about 2,500 years ago, but since that time he has arguably become one of the most influential philosophers of all time and a formative influence on Chinese culture over the centuries. Despite his popularity and influence, I have come to learn through my research for this paper that there is a surprisingly small number of books written about him in the Western language that have been translated. The Master did not write down his teachings, but he did share his ideas with many of his students and followers. After his death, his disciples compiled a book of his sayings called the Lun Yu, meaning dialogues or conversations, and translated in English as the Analects. Other than that, there is little known about him, although much has been written about him. However, Confucius is traditionally credited with having authored, influenced, or edited what is known as the 5 Chinese classic texts, which are a larger part of a collection known as the 13 Classics. However, it should be noted that some modern scholars are skeptical in attributing specific assertions to Confucius himself. Among many scholars, there is disagreement on whether Confucianism is in reality a religion or a philosophy. As Raymond Dawson states in his book, Confucianism, is often referred to as one of the 3 religions of China, with the other 2 being Taoism and Buddhism. For this research, I chose to take a closer look at Confucius's ethical and moral character teachings to see what, if any, impact it has had on his politics. Tihai Hsai, author of Confucius Said It First, writes, Confucius himself did not concern himself with religion as people might think of religion today. His teachings were ethical and political. So in this theme, Confucius' teachings did not necessarily address the afterlife or spirituality concept of the soul. Conversely, his teachings focus on human characteristics that affect your daily life, such as civic duty, honor to your parents, obedience to the powers that be. If these virtues are manifested at the ruling level and accepted and practiced by the masses, then social order will exist. As example, if a ruler is righteous, his wishes and rules should be followed, but if he is wicked, they need not be followed. As example, Confucius writes, when a ruler's personal conduct is correct, his government is effective without issuing orders. If his personal conduct is not correct, he may issue orders, but they will not be followed. From what we know, Confucius was once a minor government official in the Chinese province of Lu, and had always wanted to take a more active role in government and instill a sense of ethical morality to the people and the government. His ideas were considered too bold for the time, since China in 500 BC was still ruled under the Zhou dynasty, who controlled a loose federation of city-states. The time of Confucius was filled with constant warfare by both expanding rulers and nomadic people living in the mountains and frontiers. For this reason, Confucius left his position, and he and his disciples spent much of their time traveling from state to state in his efforts to seek out a more accepting place for his teachings. The central idea in Confucius' ethical philosophy is that every human being cherishes the aspiration to become a superior man, superior to his own past and present, and is evident in his ethics and morals. What Confucius believed constituted a superior man included many moral traits which are essential to ethical behavior. Among them held in high regard by him and his disciples include purpose, poise, self-sufficiency, earnestness, thoroughness, sincerity, truthfulness, purity of thought and action, love of truth, mental hospitality, rectitude, prudence, composure, fearlessness, ease and dignity, firmness, loveliness, growth, capacity for benevolence, broad-mindedness, charity, and moderation. These traits can best be evidenced by writer Tihai Hsai in his book Confucius Said It First, where Confucius said, the superior man in everything considers righteousness to be essential. He performs it according to the rules of propriety. He brings it forth in humanity, and he completes it with sincerity. Becoming aware and mindful of these traits, one is able to purify the heart and mind and thus live a life of ethical and moral stature as a superior man, which in turn is known as the art of living, where complete virtue takes precedence. He further believed that, in essence, this moral conduct, if attained by the masses, could serve to guide and govern societies, with the idea that crime, and consequently punishment, would be obsolete. The art of living is an ongoing process where one's inner self is continually striving to abide in the highest excellence, and from the highest to the lowest self-development must be deemed the root of all by every man. Once those moral traits are understood and practiced, the ideal state can now be attained and cultivated toward maximum yield. Confucius saw the value in the lifelong pursuit of true knowledge. By always improving one's personal self-development, which Confucius reasoned were the vehicle by which one could cultivate the qualities necessary to maintain the ideal state through a process he described as the will. Human beings all have a form of will, so it's important that their will or purpose be clear, solid, disciplined, lofty, and immovable. This was Confucius's definition of character, as he put it. If the will be set on virtue, there will be no practice of wickedness. An important factor in the will is to make the will sincere. As Confucius saw it, this was a way of keeping your focus pure and remaining true to oneself and avoiding the possibility of deceiving yourself. This is known as satisfying your own conscience and requires constant vigilance. Once you are able to satisfy your conscience, the moral character can flourish as fruit born from a well-pruned tree, and this sets the heart in the right place. The fruit of life is then made sweet by those close to you, including family and friends who seek advice on important matters and respect your moralistic thoughts. These relationships then serve to regulate and provide internal happiness, contentment, and a solid foundation for your home life. It was this form of ongoing self-development that was evident in The Great Learning, and refers to the power and ability of the mind to reach clarity when one wishes what he wills and focuses completely with purpose and desire, which promotes courage and strength. In this doctrine, there are no excuses provided for inability or failure, with the exception of death while trying. I find this concept particularly insightful into the mind of the master, whereas he seems to convey that there is nothing you can't achieve if you set your mind to it. It serves to further evidence the impact which these concepts have in today's society and everyday sayings we may take for granted. Self-control is a key element in the ethical and moral code for the master, and is characterized as want of forbearance in small matters confounds great plans. Confucius realized the need to eliminate unnecessary distractions that prevent focus on the virtuosic reality. This primarily refers to one's actions or speaking out on matters of importance. In other words, being careful in all you say or do, because you can't take them back once you've unleashed them. This might be the holy grail of relationships, and I find this teaching extremely logical and useful in life, although perhaps one of the more difficult to abide by. This brings us to the reality, and moral and ethical conduct can produce internal conflicting thoughts and actions, which may eventually become distorted to suit that individual. The Confucian way promotes the manifestation of our heavenly endowed nature, results in a strong and wealthy kingdom. For Confucius' disciples and followers, the Confucian way was the one and true way. Followers, including Mengzi, have offered some conflicting reasoning for the basis of this belief. Mengzi used various examples, including political means, as a justification to seemingly promote this philosophy in government. As exampled in Ivanhoe's book, Ethics in the Confucian Way, he describes Mengzi's claim that the Confucian way will result in a strong, stable, and wealthy kingdom. The concept behind Mengzi's claim was that when followed by rulers and commoners, it promotes wealth and maintains stability and the best option for ruling lands and maintaining a grasp on those lands. Of course, it would not have served much purpose or been adopted by both rulers and commoners if it had claimed to simply be morally correct without positive government attributes. For example, if it promoted impoverishment or social revolt against the ruling class. This rationale was basically that the good things in life occur when in pursuit of higher morality, which drives the greater universe in a positive direction. In this process, material benefits and one's self-pleasure were not wholly connected. The benefits were generated and derived in tandem by the government and the people through this moral-seeking ethical process. The beneficial happiness should not be tied to any material or pleasure alone or the ultimate rationale for the Confucian way. There were challenges to this concept led by other disciples, whereas ideas on benefit and profit were directly connected and therefore used as justification. These challenges resulted in a rethinking of how the moral justification should be assessed. As example, one concept contended that the division of labor as a result reflects the natural order of things, and this inequality was a natural occurrence, whereby people naturally differ in ability, thus creating inequality, but yet efficiency. The contrasting view held that while it's true this occurrence created social efficiency, there is a deeper meaning, which was that by fulfilling one's part, they were fulfilling destiny, which was to lead happy and fulfilled lives. Confucius' politics were a force behind his life's work, and he strived to find a state where his philosophy and teachings could be adopted into the government inner workings. His political thought process was closely aligned with his ethical and moral processes, whereby he believed that government operates best through the continued natural moral striving of the people. In this way, there wouldn't be a need for bribery or coercion. In his teachings, he professes that your obligations to the government are an extension and similar to your obligations to your family. In this theme, he saw the state as the larger household. To rightly govern the state, it is necessary first to regulate one's own family. In other words, you can't run a government if you can't manage your own family affairs. The Master's teachings in this regard combine all the traits we have discussed of being the superior man, including patience, virtue, kindness, and all the consideration one would normally extend to one's family. This may not be as evident in today's society, but in the ancient times of Confucius, this was meant to signify that in government, as in family, each member has a very specific duty, and by all performing that duty, there can be a more harmonious outcome. Rulers should act as teachers and maintain a parental-style relationship with the common people, and above all, must be fair and reasonable to keep their credibility and maintain social order without the use of force or threats. Confucius believed that to govern is essentially to rectify. This can be best illustrated in the following passage. When right government prevails in the empire, men of little virtue submit to those of great virtue, and men of little worth to those of great worth. When bad government prevails in the empire, men of little power submit to those of great power, and the weak to the strong. Both are in accordance with divine law. There were a lot of democratic principles suggested in his view of how government should work. The belief that the government and the laws produced by the state should align and be in accordance with providing benefit to those in the kingdom were a central concept of his, although perhaps a bit ahead of its time for the ruling class in China. However, as we look back in hindsight, we can see the seeds of democracy have been sown through Confucius's teachings. Content people will not seek to cause disturbance, and unruly people will quickly be identified and sorted out from the masses. Along these lines, Confucius believed in and taught that social programs funded by the state were a central way to maintain harmony between the rulers and the masses. Confucius lobbied for improved infrastructure, including roads and bridges, which he reasoned would help connect and improve commerce and ultimately drive revenue for the common good. Because agriculture was so important, he thought it should be regulated to some degree by the state and sought to create the first Department of Agriculture, along with a department to oversee labor relations for farming and transportation of agricultural goods. Other social-based programs advocated include making provisions for the elderly, orphan, sick, or otherwise unfortunate folks. For a good society, there must be accommodation for the young to grow to be able-bodied workers, the aging population until their death. A great work of government is compassion that included showing kindness, especially to orphans, widows, and childless men who would otherwise have no means of support when they grew old. Confucius recognized that any society, whether good or bad, will at some point have to deal with the reality of evil and the responsibility for evil conditions. In politics and government, where the administration's power is decentralized, there exists temptation for corruption or incompetence by those who seek to profit from the labors of the people, as opposed to the enjoyment of the rewards of public service. Confucius said, "Employ the upright and put aside all the crooked. In this way, the crooked can be made to be upright." Qualities and policies for successful government require virtue above all else, which can be seen as the root through which the tree will grow and eventually bear the fruit. Secondly, a wealthy country is one that all can be proud of, with an abundance of revenues to support the masses. Revenue in turn assures the ability to feed your people and feed your army in times of war, which is equally important to protect against barbarians and marauders who might try and invade a wealthy land. The Great Model served as a template for successful policies and qualities in good government. This doctrine specifies to secure for them, the people, the five blessings, which is good health, ability to make a living, a long and prosperous life, good personal appearance, and good moralistic character, while guarding against the six calamities of the time, which were sickness, early death, poverty, misery, and repugnant personal appearance. This was universally considered the most important policies that the most enlightened people hoped for from their government. Confucius recognized the value of encouraging a free market economy and supported this concept in his teachings. Understanding that if goods are not freely traded and dispersed, accumulation will occur, creating a surplus which drives down the worth of those goods and services, whereas the benefits are reduced. Confucius' views on taxation were conceptually similar. Taxes, he reasoned, were a necessity, although could be destructive to free market enterprise. He stressed a balance by enforcing regulations that levied a single tax structure through what was known as ground rents, which were appropriated back to the community. This system was based on the premise that the best location in a good marketplace should command more rent. As we have discussed in this essay, Confucius tied many of his beliefs and teachings to his firm view on ethical and moral behavior. By following this path of righteousness, a man could attain the secrets of life, true reality, which is what he called the root of things. Confucius developed his philosophy around a concept he deemed living as the superior man, which was essentially a guide or pathway which provided one's moral compass in life. Living as a superior man required the constant pursuit of true knowledge, meaning that one is always learning and educating oneself. This concept became known as the art of living and reflected education and moral behavior, which supported internal satisfaction and happiness. It was this idea that was fundamental to his views on the state, governing by rulers of his day, and his overall political concepts that he developed and hoped to implement. Unfortunately, this idea was new and did not gain much momentum in Confucius's times, which is why he traveled to neighboring states in efforts to find a ruler who would embrace his philosophy. Unfortunately, this did not happen, and after many years of travel, he returned to his homeland where he died a broken man, not ever knowing the true magnitude of his teachings and the weight in which one day those ideas would carry within many future governments. Confucius saw the government as a mere extension of the family, whereby respect for political officials was similar to a father-son relationship, and obedience to one's superior was necessary to maintain social and economic order. Confucius also taught that being a good ruler must also be a product of ethical and moral traits that were essential to being a good ruler, which would be evident in the choosing of ethical and moral individuals for the government tasks that controlled and managed everyday life for the common class. When this harmonious balance was attained, it created wealth for the kingdom and also served to satisfy each individual's internal needs for self-satisfaction and happiness. It is evident from what we know about Confucius's teachings and the man himself that his philosophy on politics and government were central themes in his lectures and closely related to his views on ethical and moral behavior of both the common man and also the ruling class. Confucius held education in the highest esteem and championed the rights of all people to become educated. The concept that the best person for the high office should be based on their education level and ability to be a good moral and ethical leader was largely unpopular in his time. But this was a key trait necessary for the implementation and adherence to good public policies, which would only be embraced by the commoners if their leaders were educated and righteous. In some ways, he was perhaps similar in many respects to other Greek philosophers and contemporaries of the axial age who taught pursuit of education and a philosophical understanding of life as the basis for a great civilization, thus searching for ways to apply these principles to a more efficient government.